Coming up, we discuss Spencer Dinwiddie. Does he have a long-term future with the Brooklyn Nets? And if not, what is his defined role in the upcoming season? We dive in next.
You are Locked On Nets. You are Locked On Nets, your daily Brooklyn Nets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Yes, my friends, it is the Locked On Nets podcast right here on the Locked On Podcast Network. It's your team, the Brooklyn Nets, every single day. Over there, you're going to find Doug Norrie. He's the owner-operator of DFSR for all your daily fantasy sports rankings from DraftKings to FanDuel. He's got you covered. I'm Adam Arbrecht, bringing the New York Football Giants on the One Giant podcast and your New Jersey Devils on the Devils Puck Luck podcast. We thank you for making us your first listen of the day. We are absolutely free on all those great platforms. And Doug, the topic of conversation as you and I continue to work our way through the offseason, we've kind of paced this through player by player, role by role, and we find ourselves scratching our head a little bit when it comes to Spencer Dinwiddie, because I think there are different versions of this player that exist, at least in our minds, as a two people that have covered the Brooklyn Nets now in the Spencer Dinwiddie era, and then beyond it in the return of him now in this different incarnation.
It's interesting how we've kind of gone a lot of podcasts at this point and not really honed in on Dinwiddie, even though he, one, was a pretty vital member of the team last year, just in terms of minutes and overall role, and, is trending to have a pretty big role again this season. And, when we talked about the team, often we'll just sort of trend toward the other guys. And to some degree, it's probably because I think we know what we're getting from Dinwiddie. So I think it's maybe on some level, like sort of a known quantity. And I think some of it has to do with maybe what his future or lack thereof, holds for the Brooklyn Nets. But I think it's an interesting topic going into this season, and one that can probably be looked at a bunch of different ways to some degree, to come down to sort of how you feel about him as a player, which I can definitely see both sides of this Dinwiddie coin, which we're going to get into.
Yeah, I think it's weird because when we go back to the pre-superstar era of Brooklyn Nets basketball, I have, from a pure fan perspective, a memory in my mind of Spencer Dinwiddie being a part of this comeback kind of crew. When you get into the Kevin Durant era, there was, remember, a little bit of a sense of, can he play well with these guys, or are the superstars happy with the way Spencer Dinwiddie serves his role? And was Spencer Dinwiddie, quite frankly, satisfied with his role with that team? So he goes away. Now he returns. And I think the biggest thing, as we'll talk about the stats that support, I think, both sides of the coin here for him, the biggest thing that I came across just in thinking about him is age. Because we've clearly defined what you and I think this organization should be doing. You're trying to win games now. You want to be competitive, but you need to be developing young players. They've added a lot of guys this offseason in that vein, and then be around Mikal Bridges and around Cameron Johnson for their timeline. Well, Spencer Dinwiddie is with Dorian Finney-Smith and Royce O'Neal, 30-year-old dudes on this roster that we label and talk about as guys that should be very much attainable for other teams. I don't know why, but at least in this moment, as we start to break it down, I have always kept Spencer Dinwiddie in a separate category of some kind. Like, I just don't look at him that way. And I think maybe it comes down to the fact that he was here when he was younger. And I somehow have disassociated the fact that he is now a 30-year plus player.
And he was always, and remember too, it's really interesting about him too. He was always sort of kept aside from that group of guys because he got hurt the year they were going to make the run. Yes. The year that looked like they were going to make the run, and they really could have used him in that playoff series when everyone got hurt, like Harden and Kyrie. I actually think if Dinwiddie he was on recovery at that point, if he had been able to play, I actually think they beat the Bucks. Like, they kind of, like, he was sort of the exact guy they needed down near the end. They just need like one more scorer, right? Like, and so, but it is interesting because when you think about him, yeah, he does sort of sit apart from sort of all iterations of the Nets in a weird way, and some of it's timing, and some of it that he left and signed somewhere else and then came back. It's just like, it's a really, really unique situation, and I think it's the reason why you're right. Like, he sits siloed sort of in his own compartment when it comes to Nets, both as like a team member, not like a team member. I think he gets along with everybody, but like how fans view him and how we view him. sort of sits separately from a lot of other different iterations, and it's really interesting. But you make the best point just to start, is that the age, he's in a contract season. He's 30 years old. It's unlikely he fits like the future timeline for this team. And so we could be looking at the final season or even part of a season for Spencer Dinwiddie. And at the same time, while he's on the team, it's very likely that he goes and plays another very big role with this team, right? So it's just, again, another very interesting. We just walk into a situation for the season where Dinwiddie sort of is a man amongst himself in terms of sort of context and narrative. And it's just really interesting.
And it's worth reminding everybody that he got the $20 million final year of this contract guaranteed based on number of games played in the previous season. So we know that he's locked into that. Now, again, you can draw the parallel to a Royce O'Neal who's making $9.5 million. And we talk about him as saying, hey, expiring contract, like you got to think about this. Now, maybe the money, and we'll get into this a little bit later, maybe that changes the perspective on it. But we even heard some rumblings along the way this offseason that the Nets were potentially considering or thinking, or discussions might happen around an extension for Spencer Dinwiddie. There seems to be something. Before we get into like the stats around whether or not he's the right fit, the good fit, and what it'll be for the Nets, there does seem to be something around, I think, when he came back in the Dallas trade. Yes, he was a good piece to get back, among the most valuable pieces you could get back from Dallas, I think, along with Dorian Finney-Smith. But we always talk about this with the Nets, like resetting their timeline. Yeah. There's something about Spencer Dinwiddie coming back to the team that just felt like, again, not diminishing his on-court ability, but it also felt like a nostalgia grab for the organization to say, maybe we never wanted to part ways with him. Part of that was the money that he was going to make. Remember, we gave him the contract and then helped facilitate the trade. So we got him paid and sent him off. We were willing to give him that contract. It just wasn't going to work with all of our frameworks. So there's some element to that, to me, that speaks to the organization saying, we always thought this player had a role with us. And in the grand scheme of things, it may just come down to dollars and cents and where they are. Unlike a Dorian Finney-Smith or a Royce O'Neal that exist inside of different vacuums. One guy gave away draft capital to bring him in for a superstar team that doesn't exist anymore. And Dorian Finney-Smith maybe just represents the value contract and a controllable asset that you get back in a trade. So coming up here in a second, we'll dive deeper on the stats around Spencer Dinwiddie, the things that frustrate us as a player from Spencer Dinwiddie, and whether or not he's defined as a starter in this upcoming season, or getting back into that maybe explosive bench role we've seen him have before.
All right, before we get into that, tell you about our friends over at FanDuel. You can take your first swing at betting MLB on FanDuel. You can get 10 times your first bet amount in bonus bets up to $200. All you got to do, you bet $20 and you can land $200 in bonus bets. And here's the key over on FanDuel: win or lose. It's $200 you can spend betting everything from the MLB money line, the over-under. Maybe you can get into those home run props, the strikeout props. They've sliced and diced this thing every which way for whatever game you're watching over there on FanDuel. It's all in an app that's safe, secure, super easy to use. When you win, you get paid instantly. They even have some NBA future bets up there as well, with Mikal Bridges up there, some win totals. We went back and talked about that in a previous podcast. It's all there for you on FanDuel. No better place to bet on MLB than FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Sign up today to visit FanDuel.com/lockedon. Get up to $200 in bonus bets. It's FanDuel.com/lockedon. FanDuel, official partner of Major League Baseball.
Okay, so when we talk about Spencer Dinwiddie, the 30-year-old starting point guard for the Brooklyn Nets over the last 27 games of this previous season, to encapsulate where he is from a stat standpoint and get into kind of what the advanced numbers tell us about him as a player and what his role could be. A reminder that even over the entirety of the 2023 season, which goes back to Dallas as well, he was a 17-point scorer. That was the second highest point total of his career. Those numbers shifted a little bit coming over to Brooklyn, obviously. And we saw a different type of player not playing with a Luka Doncic, right? Being in a primary role, a facilitator role, where he set career highs over those last 27 games in the assist category. What is it inside the numbers that confirm, Doug? The old eye test says Spencer Dinwiddie's a bit of a hucker and a chucker. And I think the numbers bear out that that's one of the most frustrating parts of his game.
Well, I think if we were to probably get into we're talking about this like fans, right? We watch the games and like we know what the frustrations are, and I think that the Dinwiddie frustrations, one, they stem from a really inefficient playoff series that is the lasting taste in a lot of Nets fans' mouths, right? Like, and that's for starters. I'll get into the stats in 1 second, but I know for sure, as in any sport, you are only as good as the last time we saw you on the court. And for Dinwiddie, for the most part, it was somewhat rough in the playoffs, even though the last game it wasn't terrible from an efficiency standpoint. But that series was set up really poorly for the things he does well with Embiid on the court, and I think that that's sort of the lasting taste. But I saw you're going to say something, so we'll just say it real quick, and I'll get into some of these stats. Yeah. But like I know for a fact that like the things that bother Nets fans about Dinwiddie and the things that's even frustrate us too, like about Dinwiddie. I'll tell you right now, a lot of it bears out in like what the stats are. Like this is one of those ones where eye test the rubber meets the road with eye test and analytics, 100%, which I'll get into.
Yeah, just on the Philadelphia playoff series, because you even said it there. We said going into it, it's a bad matchup for Spencer Dinwiddie. So we kind of knew that it was going to look bad, and it did look bad. This is where the fan part of my brain, and then my objective, just like observer part of my brain, analyzing it goes, man, if you're going to take a 4-game playoff sample size and ignore, again, a certain element of his game that he showed that he never had really showcased before over 27 games, I always find that hard. I understand why it's the most recent, but in totality, like his body of work coming back to Brooklyn to me really spoke to a guy that can still have a nice impact and a role on this team, even though I know these numbers that you're going to give us in a second here are going to tell us that there are, yes, warts on his game.
Well, so real quick. So on a very high level, the efficiency dropped pretty severely when he came from Dallas. He was 40, basically 40+% from 3 on lock for 2 plus seasons, and then dropped down to 29%. I want to say that's a function of not having, the best offensive engine basically in basketball in Luka, where you're getting a lot of easy shots. I think that's probably 1 for 1, though the 29% falls much more in line with basically what happened for him the rest of the career. I think I'm ready to say that the Dallas years for his 3-point shooting were the outlier. Like this is like the reality for him is more like 33% from 3. Fine. Okay. That is just what it is. Where it kind of increased, just another high level, was the assist level. The assist numbers with Brooklyn jumped way higher than we'd ever seen in his career. He was among the league leader in assist rate over the final couple months of the season. Basically it was like Harden, Halliburton, and Trae Young, and that was it. Like it was like that was the group, and those other guys are who you would say are some of the best distributors in all of basketball. And Dinwiddie, at least from an assist rate, was living in that range. I do have a question for you. When you think of Dinwiddie, real quick, tell me what do you think? Adam and I did not talk about this off. We knew we were going to talk about Dinwiddie, but this specific question, I'm putting Adam on the spot. What were you, off the top of your head, first thing that you think of? What's the thing you think he does the best, and what's the thing you think you get most frustrated with when he does it? I'm going to see if we can just pinpoint this real quick. So if you want to pass, don't worry about it. I'll go through it. But like when you think of him doing something well, you're like, oh, it's him doing this. Think of him doing something poorly, it's this. Go.
I think him operating into the mid-range space, and then whether that's getting a shot potentially or facilitating. I think that's probably the thing that he does the best. I think the thing that he does the worst is could potentially be, I know it's late shot clock. The shooting is not always great for him. And I'll also add the 1B would be his drives to the basket for all of his length and size. I don't think actually yield as high results as they should, though the free throw percentage is getting to the line where it was starting to get in the right direction with the Nets.
Okay. So you're pretty close here, right? So as a pick and roll ball handler, right when he's just running the offense and sort of like what's happening with his efficiency as a pick and roll ball handler, he's in like the 30th percentile. It's so low. He was basically the lowest on the team for guys who did enough of pick and roll ball handling, right? So it's like, okay, with you as the sort of center of the offense to start when you're running pick and roll, which is like sort of necessary in today's basketball, what's happening on those plays? And for Dinwiddie overall, running that was a pretty big problem, right? But right. But on the same token, you're like, oh, if it's just him kind of like taking mediocre defenders and getting to the basket in isolation, he was among the best on the team. Only Kyrie, for the whole season of Brooklyn, this includes Durant, in isolation, the effective field goal percentage, it was like Kyrie and then Dinwiddie, right? So it's like, oh, when it running a meticulous pick and roll, that's just not really happening. Like, and that goes into like throwing the lobs and stuff like this that I know everyone goes crazy about. Like the lobs are sort of like that's something that they want to kind of go crazy. And so like those two numbers really match up. It's like it's decently efficient if he can just get someone really one-on-one in isolation. If you're having him run pick and roll, it kind of looks pretty bad. And then you said, actually, I'm really glad you said this because he has some late in the shot clock numbers. So if you look at his late in the shot clock numbers, like very late, right? Which is like where it's going to always be hard to get this down. Like when you look at these numbers, it also gets pretty bad also, right? The effective field goal percentage goes, I think it was the worst on the team. It was basically like the third worst on the team. And he easily had the most attempts late in the shot clock. So you're like, oh, all these things.
It might be bad, but at least I'm doing a lot of it.
Yeah, right. And sometimes look, like late in the shot clock, you have the ball in your hand for a reason because maybe other guys on your team just can't at all. Right. So like you do get sort of you can get stuck into poor situations when it comes to that, like where you're just sort of last man standing on a dying offensive possession. And we know the Nets had problems with that this season because they just didn't have a lot of playmakers. And that could be a problem here too. But the numbers for Dinwiddie just definitely bear out in the, like, are we dribbling the air out of the ball? Is the shot clock getting late? Right? Is it looking like people might call this hero ball, right? Like if you're trying to define it, these words that like sort of can crop up around Dinwiddie. Like it's true, right? The efficiency goes way down. The time on the ball goes way up. You're not getting great results from it.
Mm-hmm.
And that is just kind of what happens. And I think with Dinwiddie, just to put a final pin on this, I think with Dinwiddie, I think that's just like unlikely to change. I think that is what you're getting. And the question now is like, can you live with the parts that he does well, right? Mm-hmm. And understand that these other parts are unlikely to show massive improvements, I think, at this point in his like sort of age arc.
Right at 30, and now 30 and going to be 31 years old the upcoming season. I'll say before, because we're going to get into what is the role here, right, for Spencer Dinwiddie on this roster. What should the Brooklyn Nets be doing with him to close out this episode? But the two things you mentioned there about the 3-point shooting percentage and saying, hey, I think it was a blip in Dallas, not the trend. Now, the concern there would be, as we've talked about this offseason in the additions, well, the Nets didn't add a lot of 3-point shooting, right? We talked about the 3-point shooting that they lost this offseason. So now, on the one hand, I would like to say, hey, as you come into this season, remember, you asked him to do something different. And you can look at the facilitation and say, boy, he really elevated his game in that area. And maybe with some of these other pieces, that can be accentuated more. The concern would be that if you're trying to get him back to a more of an off-ball role in the backcourt, and you want him to be a supporting cast to someone else, a Ben Simmons as the starting point guard, right? Well, now all of a sudden the 3-point percentage, like that needs to be a big part of your game potentially if you're in that lineup. And I think that's probably where my concern lies now, is for everything that he showed coming back over from Dallas during those last 27 games. Now the question becomes, can you shift yourself back to this other role, knowing that you are getting a little bit older, knowing that you are going to have less opportunities, which maybe he crystallizes himself a little bit without having as many opportunities for hero ball. But coming up here in a second, we'll dive in on, should he still be a starter? Should he be coming off the bench? Or should the Brooklyn Nets, in fact, be looking to utilize him to improve this team and continue to get younger? Okay, so we had this discussion going back talking about the other day about Ben Simmons and where his role was going to lie, and then we talked about the automatic starting rotation. And you and I both agreed, lockstep. Ben Simmons, Spencer Dinwiddie, Mikal Bridges, Cameron Johnson, and Nicholas Claxton. That's the starting five. I'll put it to you. What should his role be? As we look at these numbers and we think about the age and the way that you and I have discussed Dorian Finney-Smith and Royce O'Neal, have we just allowed ourselves to be clouded here where we should have been saying, is there a trade partner? Is there someone out there that would want a Spencer Dinwiddie at $20 million? Where do you stand on him now when we really think about the timeline for this team?
Okay, so to start this season, I would start him. I don't think that's really not even close for me. I just think that it's going to be a give more than a get more than a give situation based on, and by the way, I really want to qualify this based on the rest of the Nets roster. Like I do not think Spencer Dinwiddie is like an elite point guard. Okay. I'll be very clear here. I don't think in the scope of the NBA talent pool, he is an elite point guard. I think he's well above average, and the money is the money, and that's not going to be a problem for the Nets too much longer. But I don't think they'll resign him. But to start the season, I would definitely start him because one, the effort there, no one will ever question the effort. Two, he still provides like just enough length and on-ball creation that I think the Nets desperately still need. And really the alternatives to him in the starting lineup just to me don't look nearly as good. And you're still putting immense trust in Simmons to like run the offense, which I don't think they can totally do. So I think for me, at least to start the season, Dinwiddie is clear cut a starter. I wouldn't even entertain the bench role. I don't even know. It's frankly like a little confusing to me why people are even suggesting it based on the rest of the Nets roster. Yeah. After that, I think the great hope here is that like he can do a little more off-ball stuff. Maybe if Simmons can come back to some facsimile of like what he used to be and can be this guy that can just get guys 3-point shots that look okay, that the 3-point percentage creeps up a little bit more. And he is an enticing trade partner to a team that wants to overpay a little bit for a guy who could be an off-the-bench guy on a really good team, right? Like, yeah. And I think like that's the hope here. Does that make sense? Because I'm trying to say two things. I think he should be the starter to start. And the hope is that they can flip him for assets at the trade deadline.
Yeah. Well, and I think because to your point, you don't have now, you want to, everyone's now getting excited. This is what everybody does. Fans do. We do. Nets signed Dennis Smith Jr. Okay. What's that kind of fit there? What does it look like? Let's get into the numbers. What does he do well? Okay. Let's have him do more of that. Lonnie Walker, right? All these guys. But right now on paper, as you said, Spencer Dinwiddie is the best option that you have. And ideally, it's Ben Simmons starting, and he's there alongside of him. Now, what I think is funny is when you mentioned about it being a blip, the success in Dallas, guess what the great part about it is when you come to the trade deadline? A team that has a Luka level player, right, that has a top 10 talent in the NBA, teams that are trying to go on championship runs, they can look at Spencer Dinwiddie and look at those percentages and say,
right.
Oh, we can get that, right? The Brooklyn Nets can't necessarily manufacture those opportunities as currently constituted with Spencer Dinwiddie. Other teams can. There might be a dozen teams around the league that say, yeah, Spencer Dinwiddie can be that. And even though on its surface right now, if you said, could you trade him in the offseason, would you? Well, teams saying, do we want the $20 million contract? Not necessarily. Do we want a guy at the deadline where the cost is mitigated, where the assets we're going to have to give up, the draft capital that's going to go out the door here is going to be a lot less because we're going to understand the Nets are looking to get value? 100%. The only difference I think I would give here, if I wanted to take the other side of it, would be between the start of the season and the trade deadline, other things, other players have to clearly develop and define their roles for the Brooklyn Nets in order to make moving Spencer Dinwiddie a viable option. Because if on paper right now we say, what's the better option than Spencer Dinwiddie playing in the starting lineup? Well, that means you need a better option to be in the starting lineup, right? So whether, and that can, by the way, that can be a combination of different things. Ben Simmons being healthy. Now, all of a sudden you have this extra length. The team gets longer overall. You go and you look at a Dennis Smith Jr. and you say, yeah, you're undersized, but you can attack at the basket on offense. You do a good job, which Spencer Dinwiddie actually does as well defensively. He is good in rim protection, following players to the basket and staying in front of them. He has some size, has some length. So if you can find those replacements, even if they end up being, 15 minutes from you, 18 minutes here, and not the full 30 to 34 minutes you maybe would plug in Spencer Dinwiddie to start, then it's okay. But again, we talked about this as being a theme. Sean Marks and the Brooklyn Nets are going to try to serve two agendas here. We want to be competitive. We want to make the playoffs. Also, we want to make sure we get younger and develop for the future. And if you just take Spencer Dinwiddie out without having that clear elevation for another player and role, then you could see a bit of a drop-off on the back half of the season for the Brooklyn Nets. To what degree, we don't know.
And that's what I mean. Like there is a drop off in overall talent for like this specific guy on the team. Like there's no doubt about it. And maybe that's unfair to Dinwiddie. Maybe it's unfair to put his like overall skill set to front and center. Right. And that could be just a failing on the organization to like not add more dynamic sort of ball scoring guys. Like, and then, you know, you have Cam Thomas, but even if you factor in Cam Thomas, like really after that, the drop off is really stark, right? In terms of just guys who can just even honestly just dribble, like just dribble and get their own
let me make
shot.
it very clear. Cam Thomas should have been the name getting mentioned here as well, right? Does his game develop because that's the guy that plugs in? But
even if you add him, you still okay, great, add him. It's him. After those two guys at the guard position, the shot creation is bad. It's just bad. Like that, and so that's just, and that's not even necessarily Dinwiddie's fault. Like he is put into a situation, I think, to some degree, that's being asked more than his overall skill set. Like, because like you can see a situation where Dinwiddie, like down the trade deadline, and these aren't going to happen, but there's a world where his specific skill set, because we've already seen it once, really does fit other. Like you could put him in Milwaukee right now and have him play with Giannis, like, and to spell like Drew Holiday or something like that. That'd be a great fit. That'd be a great fit there, right? Like there's no doubt about it. Probably be a pretty good fit, like with a guy like LeBron, right? Like there are situations where you can look at him like really one-to-one and say, hey, that would actually be a good spot for you. Like the late in the shot clock stuff is not going to be as big of a problem. You're not going to run a ton of pick and roll. We're not going to have you just like sort of like trying to cook guys in isolation. Maybe we see a few less complaining at the referees because he got fouled every single time he ever took a shot, which drives everyone nuts. But you know what I mean? Like, so there are worlds where his skill set plays really, really well. It's just being asked to just do a little, probably like 20% too much here. And that extra 20% is the 20% that looks sort of bad in the end, right? And that's just, I don't know. That's just
the 20%. It's not like the 20% too. Sorry, go ahead.
I'm just, that's it. It's just like that last bit is the part where you just kind of got a little too over their skis with like what they need them to do. And that's just, and it stinks. And it kind of leaves a sour taste in people's mouth. And I get it, but it's not all on Dinwiddie in those situations, I don't think.
And it's funny because you say that 20% extra you ask makes the overall game look 80% worse, right? Like that's what ends up happening.
Yeah.
You ask this extra couple of things, then you go, well, he's not a good player. No, he is a good player, but he's not, he's not that player. And the last two things that I'll say about it is one, a healthy Ben Simmons in his role potentially mitigates some of that value of Spencer Dinwiddie in the facilitation with the other guys you brought in. And two, this is actually something I hadn't thought about. We've talked so much about Royce O'Neal, $9.5 million, great guy, could fit in a lot of teams. Well, when you come down to the trade deadline, I do wonder, like you actually probably lump these guys in the same category. How do teams view each of them from a cost standpoint, from a fit standpoint? Royce O'Neal is the far more versatile player, but I can start to paint a picture where if you're the Brooklyn Nets, maybe holding on to Royce O'Neal and the deal is going to expire. Okay, fine. If we move Spencer Dinwiddie, it doesn't necessarily disrupt as many apples in our cart where Royce O'Neal can still actually help even fill some of those gaps left behind. So it makes for a really fascinating start of the season, I think, for not just Spencer Dinwiddie, but a lot of guys, because they're going to potentially define their Nets careers over the first month and a half of the season.
You know where else would he be good? I was just thinking if they decided not to blow it up, he'd be good in Toronto, like playing with Scotty Barnes and Pascal Siakam, like that. You know, they need guard help bad because it's like Dennis Schroeder and Malachi Flynn. Like that's another place where it's like maybe less obvious, but he would really help them. Anyway, I don't know, that's just a little.
Ironically, by the way, my last note would be if the Brooklyn Nets end up facilitating 2 contract extensions for Spencer Dinwiddie and also trade him 2 times, like they might do the exact same thing. Let's talk about that extension, and the deadline, they send him somewhere else after, by the way, buddy, don't worry. We got you paid 2 times over. We love you in Brooklyn. We just prefer you playing somewhere else.
All right. We love the crypto stuff too. Okay, we're going to get out of here. Make sure you subscribe over on Locked On Nets YouTube. We are on the march to 6,000 subscribers over there. Ooh, fewer than 100 away. Let's get this done. Don't even want to have to worry about this as we head into August. Go over and subscribe to Locked On Nets over on YouTube. And if you're not over there, just subscribe wherever you listen to the podcast. It's free on both places.
And as we head into the month of August, that's where all the quotes are going to be themed now. August brings into sharp focus and a furious boil everything I've been listening to in the late spring and summer. Why that is Henry Rollins.
Oh, one of the all-time great poets. We'll be back again tomorrow talking more Brooklyn Nets basketball.
Basketball.